The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Hello people, welcome to the West Midlands for the first time. You find me here on the border between Birmingham and Solihull, and we're heading into Solihull on this route. This is going to be the maddest route I've ever attempted. It's going to be 8 hours of walking, or there or thereabouts, over 5 parishes, one continuous walk. The regulars out there know this is not the norm. Let's get things started. This is Castle Bromwich. Castle Bromwich, castle in the Broom. This week on TVI, not only am I beginning a brand new district, hello Solihull, I'm also beginning a brand new county. This is the West Midlands, a vast urban conurbation that stretches from Wolverhampton in the west to Coventry in the east. There's not a lot that's villagey out here, which is why the West Midlands has such a small number of parishes. That said, there are a few, and a lot of them are built-up urban areas. This week I'm going to be taking on 5 of those in what is the maddest route I've ever attempted to do on foot. I'll be taking on the 5 most northerly parishes in Solihull in one continuous walk, starting with Castle Bromwich. This can be defined as a large suburban village which borders the royal town of Sutton Coldfield, the Birmingham suburbs of Castle Vale, Erdington, Minworth and Hodge Hill, and the rest of Solihull Borough to the southeast. It has a population well in excess of 12,000, making it one of the most populous areas in the borough. That's quite an increase when you consider in 1861 it was just 613. It used to be in Warwickshire until 1974, when it was transferred to the brand new county of the West Midlands. It's a fact, but a few locals still hold on to tradition and claim this is still very much a Warwickshire village. Perhaps adding to the confusion, half of Castle Bromwich is within Birmingham and not Solihull. Some land was ceded in the 1920s for the construction of overspill housing estates, and so this video won't cover the whole of Castle Bromwich, only the portion that's within Solihull. If you're a local, you'll need to keep that in mind. Let's go. We start this mammoth walk on Heathland Avenue, where the boundary of Solihull Borough meets Birmingham. Heading north, the first landmark is the historic Parkland of Castle Bromwich Hall. It occupies an area just to the south of the M6's junction with the A452. This parkland belonged to Castle Bromwich Hall, a Jacobean mansion that was built in 1599 by Sir Edward Devereux, the first MP for Tamworth in Staffordshire. The hall is still here, and we'll see it shortly. It was originally a single-storey house with a plain entrance, although it looks a bit different today. This is a local wildlife site. There are many different types of plants here, and there are areas of wetland which provide habitats for wild animals. In 1979, a housing developer wanted to build houses here, but Birmingham City Council soon quashed that idea. They bought the land to prevent that from happening. The parkland is now looked after by the Castle Bromwich Hall Gardens Trust. Let's cross this to get to the first of many religious buildings along this walk, St Mary and St Margaret's Church. We're not far from Birmingham Airport here. You might be able to hear an aircraft in the background there. And now, hopefully you can see it. There it is. That just goes to show how close we are to Birmingham Airport. We can see the underside of some of the planes here. Now, don't get me wrong, this is very much going to be an urban walk. But this Parkland is absolutely nothing like that at the moment, is it? It's just glorious open, well, almost like countryside, isn't it? Which is what we're used to seeing on this channel. But trust me, things are going to get very urban later on in this walk. Castle Bromwich has several churches. There are two that are Church of England, there's a Methodist church, and there's also a Baptist church. The original religious building here is St Mary and St Margaret's Parish Church in the west of the village. It's rather unusual because it can be defined as a church within a church. A small stone chapel was known to have stood on this site before 1165. It was replaced in the 15th century by a large half-timbered structure. It was extensively altered between 1726 and 1731 by Sir John Bridgeman. His work would see the old timber building encased in brick and plaster. The massive oak timbers can still be seen in the roof. As churches go, this one is considered to have outstanding architectural and historic merit. Buried in the churchyard here is Edwin Kempson. Born in Birmingham in 1799, he studied religion at Trinity College, Cambridge. He was ordained as a priest at St Philip's Church, which is now Birmingham Cathedral, by the Bishop of Coventry and Lichfield in 1825. Edwin was then made a curate at Aston Church and was sent by Reverend George Peake, the vicar of Aston, to look after Castle Bromwich Chapel in 1827. In that year, the chapel ceased connections with Aston and became a parish church in its own right. So therefore, Edwin Kempson became the first rector of Castle Bromwich. Edwin and his wife Mary had 7 children who were all born at Castle Bromwich. His grandson became the Bishop of Warrington and was noted for his cricketing skills. That's one of the more unusual churches we'll ever see on this channel, isn't it? Now, right next door to the hall, if my phone ever shuts up because it's been pinging all morning for some strange reason, next door to the church we have Castle Bromwich Hall, and this is something of a local tourist attraction. Let's discover why, shall we? It's just over there. So, to Castle Bromwich Hall. After being built in the late 16th century, this was bought by Sir Orlando Bridgeman, the keeper of the Great Seal, in 1657 for his son Sir John. Sir John extended and improved the property in 1672. He added the second floor and a large front porch. His son, also Sir John Bridgeman, inherited it in 1710. He would extend the hall and rebuild it in local handmade clay bricks. The Bridgemans were an important family. They were created Barons of Bradford in 1792 and Earls of Bradford in 1851. A marriage brought Weston Park into their possession, which the family gave to the National Trust in 1986. The hall was then rented out or used for other family members to live in. The Bridgeman family were very religious, and this fact is backed up by some of the features of Castle Bromwich Hall. It's famous for having 12 windows, 1 for each apostle, and 4 dormers, 1 for each of the 4 Gospels. The garden door used to pass through a grapevine trimmed into the form of a cross. Lady Ida Bridgeman, or Dowager Countess Bradford, was the last family member to live in the hall. After her exit in 1936, the building was used for storage during World War II. Post-war, it was leased out as an apprentice training centre for the GEC and then used as offices. It's the same setup today, with many of its outbuildings in use by some small businesses. Don't believe everything you read about this place. The hall reputedly has a set of tunnels linking it to the former vicarage and a former pub nearby, although I'm afraid that's fantasy. Surrounding the hall is the only surviving example in England today of an 18th century formal garden, mainly because it escaped the attentions of Capability Brown. Sir John Bridgeman Jr. originally laid out the hall's gardens in the style in which you can find them now, although they have been restored by the Castle Bromwich Hall Gardens Trust. When the hall was rented out as offices after World War II, only the grass was cut and the rest of the gardens were abandoned. Everything became overgrown. The bushes, which had been cut as neat hedges, grew into tall trees. Walls and buildings began to fall down too. In 1983, the West Midlands County Council sent officers to look at the gardens to decide what should be done with them. Despite being abandoned and overgrown for 50 years, the officers realised that the pattern of Bridgeman's old gardens was still there, unchanged after 200 years. And so, the Castle Bromwich Hall Gardens Trust was established to restore the gardens and to open them to the public. They commenced restoration of the 10-acre site in 1985, and today they're known among the best tourist attractions in the north of Solihull. So trust me, as we travel around this route, the names Bridgeman and Bradford will come up quite a few times. The next thing that also is associated with them is that tree over there. On the patch of grass near the next junction is Lady Ida's tree. This was planted for one of Queen Victoria's jubilees, but nobody knows which one. Here's an interesting house nearby as we join Chester Road. This is called the Southfields and it dates to the middle of the 19th century. During the 18th and 19th centuries, Castle Bromwich was a really good place if you were a wealthy Birmingham businessman. Several of them built large houses here. Most of them have now been demolished and small housing estates or blocks of flats have been built in their place. Southfields was occupied by a number of wealthy people. One such man was John Smallwood, a Birmingham wine merchant whose family later lived at Stetchford Hall. The industrialist Mr. Barclay of Southall Brothers and Barclay also lived here. They had a large factory on Alum Rock Road which made toilet rolls. In 1908 it was occupied by Ernest Radnell, the first man to own a motor car in Castle Bromwich. He also set up the Radco motorcycle company in the early 20th century. During World War II, Southfields became a secret plastics factory and now forms part of the Castle Bromwich Remembrance Club. Here we have an old pub called the Bridgeman Arms Inn, taking its name from the family that lived in the hall. It was built in a 17th century Georgian style and today it's a private residence. Adjacent to this there was once several cottages used by servants. There was also an estate office for the Earl of Bradford. Part of the inn was destroyed by a bomb in World War II when 2 platoons of the Home Guard were based here. The cottages and office have now been replaced by a service road and new houses. Castle Bromwich's first police station was also established here under PC Charlie Whale before moving to a specialist house and lockup next to the Coach and Horses. Policing in this area now is all managed by a station in Chelmsley Wood. It ended up there via Kingshurst, which had a 2-man unit that closed down when Chelmsley Wood Station opened. The guy you saw in that last shot there asked me what I was doing outside the pub there, and he spoke to me in a very, very, very broad Brummie accent. Now, I've been told I can do a very good Brummie accent myself, but I'm not going to attempt it because I'll make myself look like an absolute fool. We're probably going to hear it as we walk on through this lot, through this urban jungle. It hasn't got very urban just yet though, has it? It's about to though, like I keep saying. The next thing on our list is actually an old post office, believe it or not. There's a good reason for this one though. Now here's a fun fact for you. Did you know that Castle Bromwich Post Office was the first located outside of London to have a telephone? It was all to do with former Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli. The phone was important to him because it meant he could keep in touch with the government. After all, he was a frequent visitor to Castle Bromwich. He used to visit the hall a lot in the 1870s, possibly to court Lady Chesterfield and Lady Bradford. He was certainly a ladies' man. Later, Queen Mary made use of the telephone when visiting Lady Ida Bridgeman. The post office closed in 2004 and it's now a hairdressing salon. Now we're on Southfield Avenue and that's where we pass the first of an absolutely crazy number of schools in this area. This is St Mary and St Margaret's C of E, a primary school. This isn't the original school. That was located on the edge of the village green and we'll see where in a short while. Let's continue down this road towards Woodford Avenue. Via Ringmere Avenue, next we come to a long, thin car park that belongs to one of Castle Bromwich's many pubs. This car park was the site of Castle Bromwich's first Methodist church in 1845. It was replaced with new buildings on School Lane in 1930 and 1964. The car park is for the local branch of Hickory Smokehouse. This stands close to the site of the former Coach and Horses, which originated as an 18th century coaching inn. The present building isn't the original Coach and Horses though. This was erected in the 1920s and re-roofed in 1938 when its thatch caught fire. Coaching inns were commonplace around here. Two of the many Castle Bromwich used to have survive into the present day. In the 1780s, stagecoaches travelling from Holyhead to London often stopped in the village, as did a regular horse-drawn bus from Birmingham to Coleshill. The turnpikes, which coaches used, lost their importance somewhat when the Midland Railway arrived in 1842, but the inns stand as testament to the village's importance to travellers. Castle Bromwich had a railway station too, which was built in 1901, closed in 1965 and part demolished in 1975. Today, this urban spread has no station and the roads are king again. Now, if it wasn't for the fence in front of that pub, you'd have a brilliant view sat in there of this, the gorgeous Village Green. This was originally known as 7 Acre Green, but there's another one called Watley Green. This one was given to the village by Viscount Newport in 1895. The village smithy was among the old cottages on the southern edge of the green at one time. In 2012, the 14 houses on the southern edge today were built. They sit on the site of a disused car sales showroom and drive-through car wash, which was demolished in September 2011. The War Memorial was erected in 1920 on this small island at the northern edge of the green, close to the historic centre of Castle Bromwich village. The locals know this by an alternative name, the Castle Bromwich Altar of Remembrance. It's one of the more unusual war memorials we've seen on our travels. It was designed by Charles Edward Bateman, an architect born in 1863. It's rectangular in shape and the names are inscribed on plaques with a cross in the centre of the two lists. On the reverse side it has the words Altar of Remembrance, and you have to say it does resemble a church altar, doesn't it? The memorial sits within a small garden surrounded by a low limestone wall and fairly close to the road. An open-air service is held here annually on Remembrance Sunday. As the historic centre of Castle Bromwich, this is where all the usual facilities and amenities once were, and it still retains a few. This row of shops, for example, line one edge of the green. Also on the edge of the green is Croft Court, which might look like just another clump of houses, but it was quite an important site for Castle Bromwich's children until the late 1960s. This is where the original St Mary and St Margaret's Church of England primary school once stood. It was built in the 19th century and demolished in 1968. The school would relocate to its much larger premises on Southfield Avenue, which allowed it to expand. It soon had a playing field, for example, something that just wasn't possible here. Now, of course, here we're close to Birmingham, we're in Solihull, we're a long way from anywhere in Cheshire. However, this road right here, you can see behind me, once led to Chester. Now we're back on the Chester Road again, and we're close to where once there used to be a toll gate. People had to pay to travel along Chester Road once upon a time. During the 18th century, Castle Bromwich was an important place at the junction of two turnpikes. Chester Road was part of them both. One of them ran from London to Chester and the other ran from Birmingham to Coleshill. A toll gate was put across the road here in 1759 and it stayed here until 1877. The toll collector lived in a small house by the gate. In 1861 it was John Smallwood. The toll house still exists, although the massive 14-foot wide toll gate was lost quite a while ago. Castle Bromwich has been a vital place for travellers since ancient times. Running through it from east to west, there was a pre-Roman trackway, likely used by drovers. It was called the Welsh Road because it linked England with Wales. As its ancient line passes through Castle Bromwich, it follows Chester Road for a short way. Next, we're at the Victory Hall. This was opened in 1922 by Lady Ida Bridgeman to celebrate the end of World War I. The hall was built on land that was owned by the Bridgeman family. It would go on to be used by the Castle Bromwich Community Church, and Google lists it now as a youth and community centre. Next up, we've got the Castle. This is an old pub dating back to the early 18th century when it was the village alehouse. Later it became a general stores and then a private residence. This was never a coaching inn like the others in the village. The castle was a small local pub for the people of Castle Bromwich village. Because this narrow stretch of road was constantly blocked with horses and carts, Lord Bradford made the decision to close the pub in 1907. It then opened as that grocery shop a year later.
Some cracking old buildings there, and I've got another one for you next. This here, that's the granary.
This is the granary on New Street, which dates back to the early 18th century. It used to be the village malt house, but now it's a private residence. Its upstairs room was once used for church meetings. An adjoining building, which has now been demolished, was an early bowling alley. A private house can now be found on that site. This next thing is all to do with a house called Beechcroft. That's this on your screens now. Originally a farmhouse, this was the last working farm in Castle Bromwich. The building is probably as old as that former post office. Hidden inside is a 16th century timber frame. Cows and horses were kept on the fields behind it until the early 1970s. The farm wasn't always called Beechcroft Farm because they often changed their names to that of the farmer. The last family to farm here were the Rawlins, and so this was known as Rawlins Farm in the 1950s. The family now run Ash End House Children's Farm near Tamworth. In 1802, Lord Bradford owned the farm, but it was let to Reverend Richard Smith. He was the vicar of Monk Hopton in Shropshire and also chaplain to Lord Cathcart, a famous military commander. In 1806, Smith was appointed rector of Long Marston near York, and if you want to learn a bit more about that place, I've been there. The video is linked in today's end screen. A large barn used to stand where the modern Beechcroft Road is today. It was demolished in the 1970s. It had a rather distinctive letter V on it when it came down. That V was for victory. It was placed there by Farmer Rawlins. The reason is all to do with what happened in World War II. Because Castle Bromwich was so close to an airfield, German bombers often dropped incendiaries around here. One of them landed on the barn, killing some of the cows. Rawlins repaired the roof with a V so large it could be seen by German pilots. That's savage, but oddly satisfying.
Okay, get ready for a proper fanboy moment here, because this footpath takes us to a street called Wasperton Close. Now, if you're familiar with the indie band The Enemy, you should take note of this street, because this is where Tom Clark grew up. Off Beechcroft Road is a footpath that leads to Wasperton Close. This isn't anything greatly special in terms of its buildings, but someone famous once lived here. The man in question is Tom Clark, the frontman of the early 2000s indie band The Enemy, who were formed in Coventry. He lived in Castle Bromwich when he was young and went to St Mary and St Margaret's School. As a fan of The Enemy myself, this was something I just had to come and see. Their first album, We'll Live and Die in These Towns, went straight to #1 in the UK charts, and I am a proud owner of that record. Now we're at Beechcroft Park, which is where you'll find the local scout hut. Now, as interesting as that is, it's by no means as important as the area to the immediate north. Running along the edge of Beechcroft Park is the A452, and just beyond that is the M6.
Beyond them both is the Castle Vale housing estate. By the way, the A452 is known as the Collector Road or the Castle Bromwich and Chelmsley Wood bypass. Although this is not the closest physical point at which we can see and hear those two major roads, this is perhaps the best place to talk about what's on the other side of the motorway. North of the M6 is a piece of land that used to be part of Castle Bromwich before the parish was split into two pieces. Immediately north of the M6 was Castle Bromwich Aerodrome. It was where Alfred P. Maxwell flew the first aeroplane in the Birmingham area in September 1909, and it later became a stopping place during early air races. The War Office requisitioned it for use by the Royal Flying Corps and flying schools in 1914, when proper roads and buildings were established. In the interwar years, it had both a military and civilian function, and became the busiest airport in the area due to its combined passenger, post and railway air business. In 1936, the Air Ministry built the Castle Bromwich Aircraft Factory nearby. A huge shadow factory, it was part of a plan to move vital resources that lay within easy range of German bombers. It would go on to be the largest Spitfire factory in the UK, building over half of the 20,000 which were ever created. After the war, the CBAF became a car body factory, and today it's the Castle Bromwich Assembly Plant. Around here, everyone knows it as Jaguar Land Rover. Incidentally, there's a song on the Enemy's debut album called You're Not Alone. It's about Jaguar Land Rover and how many of its employees were made redundant. As for the airfield, it closed in 1958, and 5 years later, new housing was built on the site. A brand new Birmingham overspill estate, it was called Castle Vale and was completed in 1969. It includes a row of ex-RAF houses along Chester Road and a Spitfire memorial. It's a large steel sculpture called the Sentinel. It was designed by Tim Tolkien. Castle Vale is by no means the only estate that stands on land which used to be part of Castle Bromwich. In 1931, a portion of its land was sold and ceded to the city of Birmingham. The loss of the land halved the area of Castle Bromwich at the time from 2,742 acres to 1,239. On the land, Birmingham would build another overspill development on and around Chipperfield Road just before World War II. Today, there's a post-World War II housing estate known as the Firs Estate. It's just to the west of Castle Bromwich Hall. It takes its name from an old house called the Firs, which was usually occupied by Castle Bromwich's estate bailiff. Now, while we're on the subject of things that are in the vicinity of the M6, let's also throw this into the mix. The castle part of Castle Bromwich's name is all to do with an actual castle. It was sited close to where the M6 meets the A452 at Junction 5. At that point is a mound known locally as Pimple Hill. It's 40 metres in diameter and appears to be a natural feature that was somehow heightened by Iron Age settlers. Pimple Hill commanded an important crossing place of the River Tame. Although somewhat reduced, it's still there, albeit sandwiched between the M6 and the A452. The Pimple name has been commonly used since 1915, and there are stories that float around suggesting it was once a Saxon burial ground, or perhaps close to one. Chester Road used to climb up a steep hill from the River Tame to the church back in the day. It was called Mill Hill by the locals. Towards the bottom of the hill was a brick structure surrounding the Holy Well of St Lawrence. That has now been covered by the roundabout at Junction 5 of the M6. Castle Bromwich Mill stood on the southern bank of the River Tame, close to the bottom of Mill Hill. It was still grinding corn in 1895 and possibly later. It later became an artist's studio until it was demolished in 1956. The M6 now covers the site. There were several other mills in the area, and they mostly drew water from the Tame. Back to the route. Next, we've got a short amble to the east as we make for Parkfield Drive, where there's a restaurant and a medical centre. Many of Castle Bromwich's older buildings have now been demolished. Lots of former farms have also disappeared to make way for new housing and roads. Although it's a very different place to what it was centuries ago, Castle Bromwich has retained some of its village character and it's very active. Via Hungerfield Road and Parkhall Crescent, we're now at one of Castle Bromwich's main communal areas. The place has a well-used multifunctional village hall. It's called Arden Hall and it contains the office of Castle Bromwich Parish Council. The playing fields adjacent to Arden Hall have a sports centre which supports several sports such as cricket, football, golf and tennis. Bromford Lions Football Club also play on them. The hall and the playing fields take their name from the Forest of Arden, the huge forested area that used to cover this part of Birmingham. Water Orton Road next, and if you walk down here back towards the main village green, you'll come to the site of the other one, the much smaller Watley Green. Watley Green derives its name from the Anglo-Saxon words for wheatfield clearing. This was the site of the village pinfold as well as a smithy. It had 2 pounds in fact, as well as a set of stocks and a whipping post. There was also a duck pond too, but that was filled in during the 1950s. Watley Hall was nearby. Not to be confused with Watley Hall in Banbury, it was a stately home which used to stand within a huge parkland. The architect of the house and its date are unknown because there's very little existing documentation about it. All that remains of the house today, which was Neo-Palladian, is its former lodge on the edge of Watley Green.
Okay, we're about to come back onto Chester Road. Now this little stretch of Chester Road, little being the operative word, has a claim to fame apparently.
Briefly, we're back onto Chester Road, and the length of this stretch sort of gives Castle Bromwich a claim to fame, maybe. The part between Watley Green and Bradford Road is numbered as the B4119. It measures only 320 metres in length and is one of Britain's shortest numbered roads, if not the shortest. Next we come to another pub. This one is a branch of Toby Carvery, but it's got a bit of history to it. As mentioned earlier, 2 old coaching inns still exist here. This originally was the Bradford Arms, taking its name from the former occupants of Castle Bromwich Hall. It was built in 1723 and it's the oldest pub in the village. It used to hold law courts and Catholic services and sits on the site of an earlier pub called the White Lion. Although no longer serving coaches, the high doors to the coach houses can still be seen here. The next thing to talk about comes in the form of this Tesco supermarket on the corner of Chester Road and Timberley Lane. This is where Timberley House once stood. Built in the late 18th century as a farmhouse, it was demolished in the 1930s and a cinema was built on the site. Named the Castle Cinema, it was owned by Harry Dare, who also operated the Atlas Cinema at Stechford in Birmingham. It opened in 1939, just days before the outbreak of World War II. The opening films were Lewis Stone in Out West with the Hardys and Eleanor Lynn in The Magician's Daughter. It was used as a store during World War II before being demolished in 1962. In 2010, this Tesco supermarket was erected in its place.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that used to be a cinema, but now it's a Tesco Express. So, at this point of the route, things are going to get very, very residential and very quickly as well. Behind me there, you can see there's a street. We're heading up that into this sea of housing. Let's go.
Right, for 90% of the remainder of this episode, we're going to be walking through residential areas. Within them are some minor landmarks like shops, but it's nearly all housing now. It's quite incredible just how much Castle Bromwich has expanded over the last 120 years. OS maps from 1900 show a very different story. For a start, this area here was a huge parkland. This is the estate between Water Orton Road and Chester Road, and this is where Watley Hall and its parkland used to be. The hall was surrounded by considerable wooded grounds and it was the second largest house in the village after Castle Bromwich Hall. It was demolished in 1935 and the housing estate which now occupies this area was built on both its site and its extensive grounds. It was probably built in the 18th century, but there is some evidence to suggest there was an earlier moated structure too, likely 14th century. It was lived in by the Knight family from the 1860s until it was sold and demolished. Before then it was owned by William Newton. He would live there with his sons Canon Horace Newton and Goodwin Newton before they moved to Barrels Hall. Goodwin Newton was maybe the most notable member of that family. He was a landowner, a magistrate, and the chairman of the Imperial Continental Gas Association. Castle Bromwich was originally a Warwickshire village. There has been a settlement here since before Stone Age times. Records and evidence tell us that the area was first settled some 5,000 years ago. The Romans, the Saxons and the Normans have all had a go around here. What makes it such a valuable piece of land would be its location, sitting as it does on a raised piece of land close to the River Tame. Despite the settlement history stretching back thousands of years, Castle Bromwich is not named in the Domesday Book. Bromwich comes from the old words brom, which is a yellow flowering broom that grows here naturally, and witch, which is an ancient name for a dwelling or settlement. For 1,000 years, Castle Bromwich was small, surrounded only by the leafy Warwickshire countryside. Until 1894, Castle Bromwich was part of the large ancient parish of Aston, and yes, that's the same Aston which gives its name to Aston Villa Football Club, which isn't far from here. Castle Bromwich has historic ties with both Erdington and Water Orton through administration, governance and land ownership whilst being part of that parish. The Local Government Act in 1894 created the parish of Castle Bromwich from part of Aston that laid outside both Birmingham and the former Aston Manor urban district. It became the brand new Castle Bromwich Rural District and held that status until 1912 when it was transferred to the Meriden Rural District.
So you see, in the blink of an eye, it's gone from a very village-like place to a very suburban-like place, and this is going to be the character you can expect for the rest of this walk all the way to Chelmsley Wood, where I'll eventually finish on Friday. Between here and there's going to be a lot of suburban residential housing and flats and stuff like that. It's just a massive spread of all that kind of stuff. There are landmarks in between all of it though, and one of those is right here. That there is the library. That's next.
This is Hurst Lane North, and that building in front of us here is Castle Bromwich Library, just as modern as all this housing that surrounds it. So why did Castle Bromwich expand so much, changing it beyond recognition from a small rural village into effectively a Birmingham suburb? Well, during the 20th century, the population of Birmingham continued to grow, reaching 1 million in 1951. Its enormous expansion started after World War I, when the city council began to improve housing for the thousands of people who lived in inner city slums. Space was becoming an issue. Thousands upon thousands of new council houses were built all around the city in order to cope. Birmingham would soon engulf Sutton Coldfield, which was added to the city in 1964. Gradually, the country areas around the city were built up with roads, houses, shops and factories, and it wasn't long before Castle Bromwich was in the firing line. Now, all the white spaces on the OS map from 120 years ago have been built on, completing Castle Bromwich's huge transformation. At the other end of Hurst Lane North is another school. This one is Castle Bromwich Junior School. This was opened in 1939 and had initially just 66 pupils. It'll be in the hundreds now. Briefly onto Chester Road again, take note of this building on the corner. It's an old people's home and it stands on the site of an old pub which came down in 2012. It was called the Chester Arms. Before that, the pub was known as the Poacher's Pocket and the Timberley Inn. More housing coming your way next. Let's talk about some of the notable people who have lived here in Castle Bromwich. Among the many is of course Charles Bateman, the architect who designed the altar of Remembrance. Another is Sir Edwin Cooper Perry. Brought up locally, he was the Vice-Chancellor of the University of London between 1917 and 1919. Music fans may well know this next name, Roger Taylor. He was the drummer in Duran Duran and used to live on Hawthorne Road, where he taught himself to play drums. One of his near neighbours was the former footballer Trevor Francis. The Birmingham City and Nottingham Forest legend used to live just a few doors away when Taylor was a child. On the music theme, we already know about Tom Clark, but Castle Bromwich also has links to ELO's Jeff Lynne, who lived at Shard Crescent for a time. The list goes on and on and on. Also of note are Birmingham historian William Hutton, former Aston Villa footballers Peter McParland, Gary Shaw and Lee Hendry, and the TV producer Alan Coleman. Behind Selworthy Road is a small park. It's called Hob Farm Park, and its name is linked to an actual farm that stood here from the 1700s until the 1950s. These houses were then built on the farmland. The word hob means a hobgoblin or a mischievous sprite. It was a common name for farms and moated sites across the country. A hob looks like whatever your imagination wants it to. Some local people call this park the Old Barn, after the barn that was still standing even after the houses were built.
Okay, so we were on Castle Bromwich's Hall's Parkland about two and a quarter hours ago. That's how long it's taken me to get to this point here. We're not a million miles away from the end of Castle Bromwich. The border with the next one is coming up in a short while. There's still a couple of things to see here. One of them is another church, then we've got a pub to see, and then there's a big school which is right on the border.
Now we come to St Clement's Church in the east of the village, which is far newer than its western counterpart. This was built in 1967, not long after Castle Bromwich was split in two. This is far less interesting than its western neighbour over at St Mary and St Margaret's, but no less important, serving as it does the eastern half of modern day Castle Bromwich. Speaking of things that are cut into two pieces, this is Green Lane, which runs from east to west, splitting this part of Castle Bromwich into two parts. It has another school, this time Castle Bromwich Infant and Nursery. It was built with the estate and works in conjunction with the junior school on Hurst Lane North. Let's head for the end of this street, because where it meets Water Orton Road, we'll find the final pub on this walk. This is the Farthings. Its sign shows a man riding an old-fashioned bicycle known as a penny farthing, and it used to show its cyclist juggling with farthing coins. However, the pub's name is not taken from either the coin or the bike. There was a pub here long before the building that stands here now. It stood near some small fields which were known as the Farthings. The word comes from the Old English word fearthing, which means fourth part or a quarter. Originally, the word was used to describe fields that had been divided up into four parts, but it was later just used as the name for a small field.
Okay, the border with the next one is in sight. All we've got left is this residential area you can see here, and the school, which is right on the edge of it.
Our final area is called Parkfield, or alternatively Parkhall. It was the site of a moated manor house first mentioned in records in 1265. It's known to have been owned by Henry de Arden in 1373. Supposedly haunted, it was demolished in the early 1970s during construction of the M6. The only remnants of the building now are within the nearby Parkhall Wildlife Reserve. The name, though, lives on by way of Parkhall Academy, the largest secondary school in the borough of Solihull. Formerly Parkhall School, this is a mixed secondary school and sixth form which was previously administered by Solihull Metropolitan Borough Council. Parkhall School converted to academy status in September 2009 and was renamed Parkhall Academy. The school is now part of the Arden Multi-Academy Trust. Even so, it continues to coordinate with Solihull Metropolitan Borough Council for admissions. It offers GCSEs and BTECs as programmes of study for pupils. Among Parkhall's most famous former pupils is Mark Silk, a voice actor who's heard but not very often seen. You do know him. He's known as the man with a million voices. You've heard him on things like You've Been Framed and the children's classic Pingu. He's probably best known though for being the voice of another children's favourite, the cartoon character Johnny Bravo. He was also the voice of Bob the Builder in the USA. We've reached Lanchester Way, which bends around a housing estate known as the Cars. We'll discuss that tomorrow because this road is also the parish boundary with Smith's Wood. Lanchester Park sits on the Castle Bromwich side, and it's the ideal point to wrap up part 1 of this 5-part walk. The other 4 won't be as intense as this one, but they will still be interesting.
Yeah, I was hoping to see a bit more of Parkhall School than that, but most of it is shielded from public view. Don't despair though, people, if you like your schools, because this next parish has got loads of them. In fact, it's rather famous for some of its schools. I'm standing right now in Lanchester Park, which is on the northernmost boundary of the next parish. If I turn the camera around, you'll see the estate which we're about to make our way through. But if you want to see that, you'll have to come back tomorrow. That's part 1 of this 5-part walk complete.
Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.